to and aloha and welcome to the Capital City Go-Go Basketball Chat podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pearson, and I'm back from my Hawaii vacation. That was absolutely wonderful. And I'd like to thank my wife for planning that. It was a wedding anniversary and a birthday. I won't mention the decade, but it ends in zero. So it was a terrific trip, and I'm well rested. And I'm getting to the my busy season, the summer league coming up. And I just wanted to mention to the people that we are kind of growing the podcast. We went from audio. We're on Spotify, Apple, and all kinds of platforms for free, and we've moved to YouTube now, as you're watching. I've already done one YouTube video, so this is my second. And we also now have a blog, and you can reach us at the blog at G2 Capital Go Insight Newsletter, and that's at my Substack, is Sam Pearson Substack.com. And if you want to reach me via the audio portion, again, it's Capital City G2 Podcast, and that will be at YouTube and on the audio platform like Spotify and things of that nature. And one of the things that we're doing here is I have my special correspondent. His name is Gabe Mendez, and he will be heading up the scouting division and to help me with the podcast to find out young talent that may be undervalued. And he'll be my set of eyes because now that I'm writing scripts, I got a newsletter, I need somebody to help me package some of this information so we can get a steady regular broadcast. So without further ado, I hate using that French term. It's kind of overwritten, but I will introduce I'll let Gabe introduce himself and any platforms or Medium, Twitter, Instagram that you might be able to find him on. So Gabe, congratulations coming aboard to help me whenever you can. And just introduce yourself to our Capital City Go-Go fans.
What's going on, guys? My name is Gabriel Mendez. I'm currently a student at Rutgers University. I'm entering my junior year. I study sports journalism. I have a pretty strong foundation with the NBA draft. It's pretty much what I cover. It's my passion. I hope to work as a professional scout for a team someday. Pretty much the way I got started doing scouting work is after high school. I pretty much didn't really have a career or, my basketball career. I kind of recognized that, it was coming to an end. Been a fan of the draft. I'm a New Jersey resident, a North Jersey resident. So all my sports teams are in the New York area. And for pretty much my entire lifetime, I'm 19 years old. They've all stunk for a lack of a better term. So the draft is always something I'm paying attention to, whatever the sport is, always seeing who is going to be the next savior for one of my teams, right? So always had an affinity for the draft, always had an affinity for the technical side of the game. So it was just kind of a natural progression for me. And for the past 2 years, I've been doing YouTube videos at the crossover on YouTube. I built a little bit of a following, and also for sports business classroom. This previous draft cycle, I've been writing draft articles for them, and we just finished up, or just our entire project kind of came to a conclusion on draft night, where we had a live show and we pretty much talked about all the prospects that we did write about. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Gabe. That was very interesting. I still think you're selling yourself short because if you go to YouTube and type in SBC draft live coverage, you will be able to watch the entire draft from the students and their perspective with regard to Bo Estes, Eric Pincus, and Dan Purcell, a former scout, and they did the entire draft. And it was wonderful. As a matter of fact, instead of watching ESPN, I muted my volume and watched the SBC live draft live coverage. And Gabe was fabulous. In particular, he was going back to back on a couple of draftees, and I thought he might get tired. But with his enthusiasm, he kept me entertained, and I was very proud of him, and I'm very proud of all the students actually. And it was nice to see that SBC is growing, and we're getting young talent like Gabe. And it's interesting because I was watching some of his work before I realized I didn't know anything about the project. So I was glad that I had a spot for an eye for talent. And I went out and reached out to him, and we've been corresponding. And so it's nice that I'm not the only one that recognizes this up and coming young man. He's going to be talented. So we are blessed to have him on board, and he'll be, like I said earlier, he'll be my second set of eyes to make sure that I stay on and get the talent evaluation that you're going to expect and have expected from this podcast. So, Gabe, one of the things I wanted to ask you before we dive quickly into the draft was the Wizards had a complete front office overhaul, and I want to get your perspective on that because what I envisioned from the personnel that was selected to replace Tommy Shepard and other players, this was just an open, honest saying we need a complete rebuild. Now, how do you feel about that?
Well, I completely agree with that. I think that this was the direction that the Wizards have kind of been begging for. I think that if fans are being honest with themselves, the pathway to being in that inner circle of contenders within the Eastern Conference, that window I think closed when John Wall started, the injury started mounting for him.
Yeah,
Now John Wall, with the way the team was built, Otto Porter was a nice player, didn't necessarily live up to being, the third overall pick, those sort of expectations. And Bradley Beal is a great player. Well, maybe great is a bit overselling him. He's a very good player, probably going to be a third option on the title team, probably in the exact role that he's going to be for the Phoenix Suns this upcoming season. But that's not a nucleus or a core that you can win a title with. And I think treading water, the way the Wizards have been the past couple years, and not even necessarily treading water in like we're a seventh, eighth seed. We're talking about treading water in we're the ninth, 10th pick in the
right,
draft. Treading water, and you've brought in some talent here and there. Guys like Hachimura and Avdia, but their development kind of stagnated throughout their tenure with the Wizards. Well, Avdia's tenure is still continuing, right? But
right.
regardless, the talent that you had drafted hasn't necessarily blossomed, and you've kind of just been treading water in relative mediocrity. So I think blowing it up is for the best, and I really love this staff that Winger has brought in. I love having Travis Schlenk as sort of like that VP advisor role,
Right.
where we've talked about it before, me and you, Sam, where just having that expertise of not even necessarily saying that Travis Schlenk was perfect during his tenure at being at the helm for the Atlanta Hawks, but just having that experience and knowing what it's like to select players at in the top 10, right? Knowing
Right.
the gravity of the selection with your job on the line, your assistant's job on the line, just multiple people's job on the line, your family's income at stake, right? Knowing the pressure that comes with that. I think that's very important to have that, being a first timer in that role and having someone as an advisor that's been there, done that before. And
Yeah.
also like the hiring of Will Dawkins as the GM, and it kind of signals the direction that the Wizards not only are going in, but they've shown that they're going in. Where it's going to be an ugly rebuild in the beginning, but they have. I wouldn't necessarily say a poor nucleus, but there's some talent there. You got look
Hmm.
at Gafford, Kispert, Avdia. Now you have Jordan Poole, who you hope can develop. You still have Johnny Davis, who we'll talk about. We'll talk about
Oh
later.
yeah, Johnny.
And obviously, you still have Bilal Coulibaly. You also brought in a guy like Patrick Baldwin from Golden State that you
True.
traded the seventh overall pick for, which we'll talk about later as well. But I really like this hire of Dawkins since this is going to be a thing where you have to rebuild from the foundation up, and I think bringing in guys who are focused on development is really gonna set the groundwork for this team moving forward and help take the Wizards to the next step of where they eventually want to go. But yeah, I really, really like all the hirings that Winger has made so far. And I love the Michael Winger hire in general.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree pretty much with everything you said. One of the things that I was fortunate enough, maybe about 2 years ago, I was talking with John Robbins of The Athletic, and we had a nice debate online with regard to he was reluctant that the Wizards have to rebuild, and I was arguing that they should have traded Bradley Beal years ago in order to get the maximum effort, trade assets. And so I wish I could talk to him now, a couple of years later, and not to say that I was right, but I was right, and I wanted to see what his feelings were with regard to the rebuild that's going on. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the Wizards made a pick with their pick, and I was wondering who your pick was that you thought the Wizards should have selected. And talk about those two players, your pick first, and who the Wizards actually select, and kind of compare and contrast the two players.
Well, in our SBC mock draft, it was always fluent with the Washington situation. Early on, we usually had one of the two guards that ended up going well in the top 10. Casey Wallace was selected exactly at 10th,
Mhm.
and Anthony Black was taken sixth by the Orlando Magic, and that was because at the time, for the majority of the draft cycle, really up until the final hour, Bradley Beal was a Washington Wizard, and the assumption was always, well, they
Reason.
need a point guard still. Even now, I mean, Jordan Poole is more of a combo guard, two guard. We'll see if he can develop into a lead guard, but I still think point guard is a whole, not even necessarily a point guard, just a floor general. And I
Right.
think that's something that Anthony Black really excels at. I think he would have been able to play off of excuse me, not Beal, off of Bradley Beal, while also being able to run the offense. Excellent slasher at 6'7", great defender. I thought that would have been a great fit. But I also was of the belief that Washington should have just taken the best player available, and I think
Okay.
that's exactly what they did. And I have absolutely no complaints with the Coulibaly pick. It's probably Coulibaly ended up probably being one of my favorite, if not my favorite prospect in this class. And I think just with his tools, 6'8", 7'2" wingspan, long, wiry athlete, excellent footwork, especially defensively. I mean, on ball, it's very rare to see such a young and Bilal falls under the category of a raw prospect, but when you really watch him defensively, I mean his ability to get over ball screens. I mean it's almost not even like you might as well just not even set a screen the way he's able to get over
You
them. I mean,
move.
it almost makes no difference, and that's just not something that you see out of an 18, 19-year-old, right? And
Right.
offense, again, he falls under that raw wing player where you think of like the stereotypical excellent physical profile, but the skill set needs to catch
Need
up.
to back.
Bilal has shown flashes of being a ball handler, playing for the Metropolitans '92 team along with Wembanyama, of being a ball handler, a guy who can run a pick and roll efficiently, had great synergy with Wembanyama. Nice touch passes, has beautiful touch on his passes, has shown flashes of being able to thread needles. So his upside as a ball handler is there. It's evident when you watch it. I think his handle definitely needs some work. That's one area that he's definitely going to have to improve on if he is to reach, that ceiling as a ball handler.
Right.
Think as an off-ball player, that's an area where I could really see him flourish early on in his career, where you don't want to overwhelm the kid too much, especially if he's going to be starting playing a lot of minutes for the Wizards this season. So, again, we're talking about 6'8", 7'2" wingspan, and he knows how to utilize his physical profile. He knows how to fill in open areas on the court, cut when there's an open spot on the court, right? So I think that's a part of his game that will really show itself early on if Wes Unseld Jr. is able to if he wants to go down that route.
That path. Well, let me ask you this. A lot of our go-go fans and a lot of basketball fans in general are not watching the international players. And so what would be your comp with regard to him? Who that you think that a regular NBA fan would could say, okay, this is what this guy looks like, and his game is sort of like that. Is there any player in particular that you think that the Wizards selection would be a comp for?
I think he has a little bit of elements of different players. I would say a little bit of a almost kind of like a Peyton Watson, if you've never seen a Peyton Watson before, where just this long, wiry athlete that uses his physical tools defensively, but also is able to score a little bit around the rim and whatnot. Again, he's more of a lesser known player for Denver. Thinking more well known, I would say along the lines of he reminds me a little bit of like a Keegan Murray defensively.
Okay.
Uh, there, just again, this stout, solid on-ball defender who's able to do a multitude of things on that end. But offensively, I don't even necessarily think there's a comp for him just because
He's got to
again,
develop some more skills,
he,
apparently,
he's
right?
got it. Yeah, like Bilal is really his own player with his own defined strengths. But again, the reason why I point out that I really want to emphasize that he's not just your raw wing prospect, right? He's shown flashes of being so much more, and he still has a lot of growth to do, especially again with the ball handling and also just his shooting, especially on ball. So again, he has steps that he needs to take in his
Okay.
development, but I think he's an absolutely perfect pick, especially
Okay.
for Washington.
Yeah, yeah. When you're rebuilding, you don't really have time to select a need. You just got to get the best athlete available. And one of
Right.
the things with regard to now that this is the summer league, Let's talk about a few players that have been on the go-go um, and started at the summer league, but eventually got to the go-go. And let's start with Johnny Davis, who was last year's pick, and talked about him with regard to that year 1996 and what you were telling me about how Johnny Davis is kind of an anomaly with regard to the year 1996.
Yeah, Johnny Davis has spent the most time in the G League since right around that range amongst any guard selected in the top 10. That just shows you the
Wow.
unprecedented rookie season that he did have in a negative way, right?
Right, and negative. He had a great attitude. I mean, I was following him. He did everything that the Coach Williams asked, the organization asked. But from what I was observing, he's a bit slow. I don't know if he's slow or the game is not. He hasn't caught up with the pace of the NBA game yet, and his shot selection. His form looks good, but it just wasn't dropping for him. And as a former lottery pick, I think he was picked 10, and to be sent to the G League and not even start on the G League, you know, we're seeing red flags here. And now he has a new regime, so they're not beholden to him at all. So kind of give me an idea of what you think, that if you were in Johnny Davis's shoes, how would you feel about your future with the Wizards, or what would you do to improve your game so that the new management will say, he's raw, but we can work with him. What are some of the things that you would be working on?
Well, if I was Johnny Davis or anybody in the circle, I think the big thing has to be the 3-point shooting. I mean, you have to
Mm,
get the 3-point shooting down. I think he's a player in college who was never known for his 3-point shooting. He was always known as a tough shot maker, especially in the mid post area where he's a throwback guard, really. I mean,
mhm.
using size to be a mid range scorer, tough finisher around the rim over when he was with Wisconsin. But in general, I think the shooting has to improve, right? You
Yeah,
cannot more of a 3-point shooter as you were. And I think in general, his play style just isn't necessarily cohesive in today's NBA, right?
yeah,
Just taking away possessions, just posting up in the mid post. Now, you see some of the best guards in today's NBA utilize the mid post, but they have other facets of their game, like a Jalen Brunson or a Luka Doncic. They're able to do more than just be, a back to the basket mid post scorer, right?
hmm
They're able to splash, they're able to shot create, whether that be in the mid range or from behind the arc for both of them, right? And I think for Johnny Davis, that's an area that has to improve for his game. It has to improve. I think in general, in you saw the red flags during his sophomore season for Wisconsin, where he really didn't do a great job of creating space. A lot of it was just
right.
shot making. And I think I got the chance to see him in person when Wisconsin came to play Rutgers. And Caleb McConnell was guarding him, and Caleb McConnell was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year that season. One of the best defenders in the nation. But still, I mean, we're talking about a guy that was a top 10 pick who was fresh off of dropping 40 points on Purdue, who was
Mm,
one of the best teams in the nation that season, or still is to this day. But the point is that when I see him in person, it was so evident, and it's one thing that really stood out to me. Excuse me, like just how reliant he was on tough shot making and how
right.
if you put and Caleb McConnell's not an NBA player, but defensively he's one of the best players in the nation. If you were to put a bigger wing who does a good job moving laterally, and you put them on Johnny Davis, and he just struggles so much to create space, and I think that's really been one of the main causes to why he struggled so much is because relying on tough shot making when you're six
Yeah,
four it's just not going to work. And when you're
right.
not a point shooter, you're not a great facilitator. You're just going to struggle to find minutes,
Yeah,
any kind
yeah,
of find any kind of rhythm or consistency offensively. So I'd really say, he has to just rework his game. I think
yeah.
he has to rework his game. I think what got him drafted worked well at the college level, but I think cutting the mid post stuff out of his game has to stop. I think in general, on ball stuff, just work on becoming a average 3-point shooter. Let's start there.
Right. Start from the beginning. Yeah, exactly.
I think, in my opinion, his game would have to be completely reworked from the ground up, and I think he
Yeah.
would. start with relying on 3-point shooting, and I would say that he's a bigger guard for a two guard. Size wise, he's not necessarily
Mhm.
the tallest, only about 6'4", but I'd say utilizing his strength, maybe being able to attack closeouts and finish at the rim, or at least draw a foul with his size. I would say that's where I would start with his game. But yeah, I think Johnny Davis. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The way he's been playing over the course of the past 2-3 years hasn't translated.
Yeah, and it's been sort of at a constant level. You haven't really seen anything up, or he hasn't really gone down. It's just been kind of a flat so far. One of the things I want to do is contrast Johnny Davis with, I think probably is one of the best examples with regard to what the G League can do. And here I'm talking about Jordan Goodwin. He was undrafted. He started when I started the podcast. He was on a Exhibit 9 contract, non-guaranteed with the Wizards in Vegas. I watched him, but I didn't really think much about it. The podcast was not anywhere near on my radar. And by the time I came back from Vegas and I started the podcast, I watched him evolve, and I could see that he had good skills, broad skills. He was athletic. He could pass. His shot wasn't great, but he could score. Let's put it, he was the scorer. But then as I followed with regard to the podcast of following him and the Go-Go, I noticed that he started getting better and better. He ended up with a two-way contract. Now he's moved to Phoenix because Phoenix, I thought, got a good bargain with the guy. They got a cheap player, 2 years left on a contract, and some of that was for salary cap purposes. But I always contrast uh, uh, Jordan with Johnny Davis, and you have you know Johnny Davis was a lottery pick. He was undrafted, but now it's kind of the other way, where now we've got Jordan, who's a fairly established NBA player, and Johnny Davis is still kind of learning there. One of the things I also wanted to talk about with regard to the draft, who are your maybe from 61 to maybe 63 players that you don't think that probably weren't drafted, but you think that the Wizards might pick up and invite for a summer camp, and maybe even a two-way contract?
Yeah, I think at this point, most of those guys have already been scooped up
Oh,
uh,
of course.
through two-way contracts. But I think right now, as it stands, I think maybe you could offer a guy like Leaky Black. I could see becoming an enticing option for the Wizards. A guy who had a relatively disappointing season for UNC. Was a is it 6'7", 6'8" athlete. Showed some flashes as a defender over the course of his tenure, over the course of his collegiate tenure. But in general, is a guy who still needs polish on the offensive side of the floor. Is 23 at the point of this recording, so it's a bit older. But again, a guy
Mhm.
who gives you some upside, especially with his athletic intangibles. So I think that could potentially be an option when you see some of these guys that are getting these camp invites, these summer league invites, but
Right.
won't necessarily get that two-way deal, right? So I think this is the kind of caliber of player that the Wizards should be looking out for. I also think potentially a guy like Drew Timmy could be an option. I doubt that Drew Timmy will get a full-fledged, two-way contract or a two-way deal when it's all said and done, especially over the course of the season. So I think bringing in him, a guy who was one of the best players in the nation over the past couple of years, but in general, struggles defensively, isn't necessarily rim protector, doesn't have a position, but offensively is one of the best post players
Mhm.
in this class. So maybe could give Washington some instant offense. I do really like the selection of Tristan Vucevic off the bench
Oh,
for
yes, yes.
in the second round, who kind of fills a similar role where he's going to be, this instant offense guy who will probably struggle some on the defensive end, but for a team that doesn't necessarily have, the best crop of scores, I mean, you can pretty much take anything you can get, right? So
Yeah.
that's yeah, I think that's a potential option. I think a guy like Alex Fudge, who got an offer with LA. I think it remains to be seen if how long he'll stay with the Lakers, given all the players that they did draft. But Alex Fudge is one of my favorite undrafted free agents in this class. Is a sophomore at Florida, 6'9", shows some in serious defensive upside. I think his upside is defensively is one of the best in this class. However, Alex Fudge offensively just needs a ton of work. He's just
Okay.
not super coordinated on that end, not a great shooter. So a liability, keep it a buck. He's a liability on the offensive side of the floor, but defensively, he's shown real upside, especially on ball. He's able to use his size and his length to bother ball handlers, whether that be a guard or a wing or whatnot. Shown some flashes as a rim protector as well. So I would really like if Washington was able to snag Alex Fudge as a potential long-term developmental piece.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're getting ready to close here, but one of the things I wanted to circle back to our beginning conversation with regard to the new regime, and one of the things that you pointed out, and which I write in the newsletter, is if you look closely with Winger, Dawkins, and Schlenk, each one of those people have a reputation with regard to finding talent either in the lottery or someplace else, and they're used to rebuilding. And one of the things I think Ted Leonsis did a great job with is we have Oklahoma City. A lot of connections with there between Winger and Dawkins, and Sam Presti is like the role model for GMs, and he's rebuilt the team Oklahoma City twice. And then you have Schlenk, who he was affiliated with Golden State, and he's affiliated with the Atlanta Hawks. Again, teams that have been rebuilding, they just scratch and started from the ground up finding young talent. And so one of the things I want you to do with regard to your analysis is the Go-Go have been relatively good the past couple of years. They have had great. They've been in the playoffs 2 consecutive years. Their former coach Mike Williams is now an assistant coach with the Utah Jazz, and so I was wondering, what do you think that the new regime can add when the Go-Go's are actually pretty good? I mean, do you think that it's a schematic thing, or do you think that they're going to overhaul what's working now with regard to the Go-Go and their success rate? So, what do you envision with regard to this whole new regime coming in that have rebuilding experience, or you think they're going to be just in the process of keeping to develop talent?
Well, I'd say keeping and developing talent was the route that I would personally go. I think that's the route that they're tending or they're showing a willingness to go down. We mentioned it before how, they're pretty much clear. They've cleared house
Yeah,
throughout only the from the front office all the way down to the G League staff. So I think they'll bring in their own guys, and obviously the entire front office is focused around player development. So I'd assume that's the route they're going to go with the Go-Go team as well. But again, I think using the Go-Go team, their G League affiliate, as another avenue to develop players, since I mean, think about it, the Wizards don't necessarily have, that franchise player. You hope a player like Coulibaly could turn into that. But in general, there's a lot of players on this team that you have to figure out what you're going to do with. Right,
yeah,
Daniel,
exactly.
Corey Kispert, Johnny Davis, Denny Avdia, Jordan Poole, right? You have so many guys that you have to evaluate and see what they have, that not all of them are going to get that opportunity, especially some other guys. Like, for example, I mentioned Patrick Baldwin before, that you traded the 57th pick for. I is he going to be able to develop with? Is he going to be a guy that's going to get significant minutes with this
Yeah,
Washington team, with the big club? We don't know. I
right,
assume not, based on how many forwards they already have. So I think that's a guy who can go down, play for the Go-Go, and you can focus on his development and seeing if you could get the best out of his skill set.
right. Yeah, I'll have to agree. I have to agree with that. I can see a complete overhaul, and it's good. And I'm glad that doing player development. In a recent article that I wrote for G2 Insight, I call it the cut and paste that they formerly did. They get a player and throw them on the roster. There'd be no synergy between the players. They're learning on the fly, as if now that using Oklahoma City as a role model, you can have the parent team and the affiliate minor league team can use the same terminology. They can get and mesh with one another, as opposed to each year there's an overhaul of just one or two players. They have to learn the system, and not on that. makes it difficult for that synergy to complete with regard to the teams, the minor league team and the affiliate. With that, I am going to thank Gabe for coming out. I know he's tired. He needs a break from all this draft evaluation. So I won't be bothering him for a while. I'll let him rest up. And I really appreciate him taking time to help me with regard to this. And to all the Capital City Go-Go fans, I'm going to be publishing some information with regard to the Summer League. And this is the third year that we're starting. And then in September, I don't know the exact date yet, but I'll be out there covering the Capital City Go-Go tryouts, the local tryouts. So we've just got the Summer League, we've had the draft, and then finally in September they'll have the national tryouts. And so again, I will be covering that. That's actually a fun time. See the local talent here in the Maryland, Virginia, and DC area try out for a pro team. So with that, Gabe, you take a break, have a relaxing, and I'm going to um, close this session by saying, remember to be kind one another. And started off with the theme of Hawaii Aloha. So aloha also means goodbye. So take care until the next YouTube, and everybody relax and enjoy the summer. Bye.